I'm going to record it here. So you might hear a little thing that says recording in progress.
We did.
That would be me. And let me pin myself to the middle so that the recording shows my beautiful pink face in full color for all of you here. Great. So where are we going tonight? Last week, Rabbi Toker was talking about Parak Ches in Shmuel Beis, which is what we will be doing tonight. I have things that I will share with Psukim and stuff on it. If you are in front of a big screen, you'll be able to see everything. If you're in front of your phone, you can ignore all of my screen shares, as many of us, I'm sure, frequently do when the print is teeny tiny. But basically, Rabbi Toker last week just did the first few psukim of Parak Ches. Parak Ches is a really interesting and epic parak of Shmuel Beis. I liken it to a montage. Give me a second. Yep.
Michael, can I interrupt you for 1 minute?
Let's talk about the sponsors.
Yes.
Let's do that. Absolutely. Please do Rosalie, but she's going to talk about Ron and Elisa Ziff, the very, very fine people.
Okay, so tonight's shir is sponsored by Ron and Elisa Ziff in memory of Ron's beloved father, David Ben Kopel, David Ziff, Oliver Shalom, on the occasion of his yahrzeit.
And hang on a second, Rabbi Toker is calling me. Hello. All fixed. Rabbi Schiffman handled it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have fun. I got a kol tuv. What is life without a kol tuv now and then? So, as I was saying when I set up a wall of sound before, I forgot to thank the people who paid to have me here. And boy, do I hope the Ziffs don't mind that it's a substitute teacher for the night. Actually, I saw Ron at Mincha and he seemed cool with it. Rabbi Toker was talking about Parak Ches, which is kind of a montage. For those of you who know the occasional sports movie or war movie, a montage is like when Rocky loses the first fight and then has to go win the second fight. And then he does incredible training. My favorite movie at the time was Rocky IV because I was young and impressionable, and it was 1984 and the Russians were the bad guys. And so Rocky goes running up and down a bunch of Siberian mountains, dragging logs and doing all kinds of training the old-fashioned Russian way. And so instead of showing each episode in great long detail, you just show a bunch of little clips of him training to get ready. The same thing happened in the Captain America movie that came out, I guess about 10 years ago already, where Captain America and his merry men go smashing Hydra bases, because in Captain America, the bad guys can't be Nazis, they have to be Hydra, an imaginary group that has no problem with Jews, they just hate everybody else. So none of you know what I'm talking about because chas v'shalom, you don't go to popular culture, but just trust me, they do this in movies all the time. They stole it from Shmuel Beis Parak Ches, where David HaMelech does amazing things on behalf of Klal Yisrael, making wars that are huge successes all across the board, one after another. What the rabbi talked about last week were the specific wars in Psukim Aleph and Beis against Moab, which was a country that is always traditional friends of ours, as you may or may not remember. Let me make this a little bit bigger and then share the screen so you'll be able to see. And so we'll start from there. Give me a sec. Let me get to the right screen. And let's share this. And what's showing is the wrong screen. Let us try again. Can you see right now a screen that says on top 2 Samuel chapter 8? Nope. So let me unshare and then reshare. Hold on a sec. Stop share. And then share screen. There we are. Samuel 2 chapter 8. Now do you see 2 Samuel chapter 8?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for nodding. I greatly appreciate it. So last week, as you can see, what they said at the beginning was it came to pass that after this, David smote the Philistines and subdued them, the Plishtim. And we talked about the Plishtim a little bit. And then Vayaches Moab. And then he smote Moab and measured them off with a line and made them lie down on the ground and put a whole bunch of them to death. Why did he put a bunch of Moabites to death? Because they killed his family when he stashed them in Moab for safekeeping. And this, among other reasons, was the main theme of last week's shir, which was why David couldn't build the Beis HaMikdash, because he had blood on his hands. And some say that that was because Hashem said so. that David had done terrible things and committed murder. But others, including what the rabbi was mainly saying last week, said that it was David himself who was makbid and felt that he wasn't worthy of building the great building of peace among all the nations because he had been a tremendous weapon of war himself. We know that it said in last week's parsha at the very end of Yisro, oh, perfect timing. It said when you build the mizbeach to God, lo sibne es hen gazis. You shouldn't use carving tools of metal. Tools that are ordinarily weapons of murder and violence should not be used to build the altar that is going to make peace among people, that is going to make peace among Klal Yisrael. And David HaMelech felt strongly about that. Although we'll see an alternative shot about that, depending on how long it takes me to talk, because you know me, I can talk. But later on in the parak, we'll see that maybe David was not so scrupulous about leaving some of the precious metals taken as war bounty and not using them for the Beis HaMikdash after all. And so we're going to start with Hadadezer, we go to Aram, and that's where we're heading now. Barbara or somebody is making some noise. Anybody have something they want to say?
Yeah, just a quick thing. When it says Vayihi acharei chen, what is the acharei chen? After
The
what?
Parak Zion, we don't even care about that. That's 2 weeks ago. We have short-term memory loss. We are right now in the present. And what does David do in the present? Pasuk Gimel, Vayach David es Hadadezer ben Rechov melech Tzova. David smote Hadadezer, the son of Rechov, the king of Tzova, all the way up to the north, Belechto lahashiv yodo binahar Taras, when he meant to extend his dominion to the Euphrates River. Whose dominion? Who are we talking about? Who exactly was trying to get to the Nahar Pras? And to do that, we need to look at a little bit of geography, hopefully in order. Here is a map. Can you see a map right now rather than text?
Yes.
Okay, because I switched tabs, so I'm never sure what can show. But here's a map of modern Israel as brought to you by worldatlas.com on the internet.
I'm surprised it's on the map.
I grabbed a nice, easy to read map of Eretz Yisrael. Don't worry about little individual places, but this is where Eretz Yisrael is, the kind of off-white color here, with Egypt in gray down on the lower left, and then Syrian desert, Saudi Arabia, and a very large Jordan over on the right. When they did the partitioning of the Holy Land, even when they were making Eretz Yisrael in 1948, mysteriously, they decided to make Israel a lot smaller than the other portion of Palestine that went to the Arabs. But then it turned out we had too much Israel for ourselves.
You're breaking up, Michael.
And so, what? My internet connection is unstable. That's not good. Okay. I can switch to a different network, but I might lose everything. Okay, hold on. I hope this works. If I disappear, I'll be back. Okay, am I still with you?
Yes.
Am I clearer and easier to hear?
So far.
Or just about the same? All right, we switched to the basement network. Hopefully that will work. So here is the land of Israel. Notice all the big gray parts that they keep trying to take away from us. There's the West Bank in the center of the map. There's the Gaza Strip down on the left-hand side where the Plishtim used to be. That's never been a problem, not in Jewish history, except for the past 3,000 years or so. Great. There's the land of Israel. Here's another map of the land of Israel where it's orange, Noah's Jordan on the right, Syria on top, Egypt down on the bottom left. Great. How does this compare to the original Eretz Yisrael? So let's have a look. And let's have a look at the original Eretz Yisrael as inhabited by the 12 tribes. This is the Eretz Yisrael we inherited when Yehoshua took the land. And when Moshe Rabbeinu, over the next several months as we get through Bamidbar, conquered the Transjordan, there on the right side of the Yarden River. If you have a look, you notice that the boundaries of biblical Eretz Yisrael are not that different than the boundaries of the current Eretz Yisrael. So here in a very bad Photoshop is current Israel overlaid on top of the 12 tribes. And what you'll see is that it's roughly the same area, not including the stuff on the east side of the Jordan River, because that is the country of Jordan. What you will notice, if you can look carefully, is that we actually extend further south into the desert now than we did then. So this was Eretz Yisrael as originally given to the 12 tribes. Modern Israel is roughly similar in size to that, although a little shorter up north and a little longer down south, because they don't mind if we have the worthless desert part. Fine. By the time you get up to the rule of a different Melech, Shaul HaMelech, you can see Eretz Yisrael has shrunk from what the 12 tribes used to be. The land of Israel is far smaller under Shaul HaMelech than it is today, or than it was even among the 12 Shvatim. If you look at it, at these red dotted lines, you'll notice that we've lost an awful lot of territory to the south, and the entire coastline no longer belongs to us.
Why?
Because under Shaul HaMelech, over the time of the Shoftim, the non-Jewish nations had whittled away at what we had. Modern, let's see if I have it. Here we go. Modern Israel is much larger than Shaul's Israel was. Shaul's Israel lost a great deal of territory, as you see on the bottom, on the top, and on the left, over to the west. That is what David HaMelech is going to be fighting back against, is all of this loss of territory and what the other nations represent in terms of a threat. Now here is David HaMelech's Israel by the time he is done. And I'm sorry for switching back and forth between all the images so quickly, but it's just to get a little bit of context of what we're dealing with. This is the biggest Eretz Yisrael has been, was, or will ever be. Eretz Yisrael will never again occupy this amount of territory, perhaps when Mashiach comes. But until then, absolutely not. Here is modern Israel today. Make sure I've got it. And look how it's barely half of King David's Israel. That is sort of an amazing thing to realize. In the events that we are learning tonight, the wars of David HaMelech, he more than doubled the size of the Eretz Yisrael that we have today, which in turn is 1/3 bigger than the Eretz Yisrael King Shaul had. King Shaul was not supposed to be the king we were waiting for. David was supposed to be the king we were waiting for. This huge explosion of territory is the high point of Jewish history in many ways. And if you look, here's Eretz Yisrael overlaid, badly photoshopped. Look above the top of the off-white. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but look where Sova is. Sova is above Damascus. Z-O-B-A, Zoba, in the middle of the map, the top of the green. Sova is where Syria is today. And not only that, it says we went as far as the Nahar Paras. Where is the Nahar Paras? The very top right-hand corner of the map, the Euphrates River. Look how much territory David HaMelech is going to conquer as he fights all of these wars against all of these enemies and succeeds at everything he does. The idea of an Eretz Yisrael this large is sort of unthinkable in modern era, certainly, but even when we first had the 12 tribes. And it's amazing to me visually just to see that, if only because normally we don't think of it in those terms. Question, comment, somebody?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
How come he went so far up north if that's not really part of Eretz Yisrael?
In fact, that's part of the discussion of what happens here with the psukim. If you look in the Gemara, you will see that Syria, which is that top area here, Syria is the territory that David conquered that's not considered part of Eretz Yisrael proper. Everything from the green on up is questionable if they have to bring Truma and Meiser in the time periods later when Jews lived there. Because Truma and Meiser are mitzvos of the land of Israel, and they are not considered halachically part of the land of Israel 100%. They are considered personal conquests by David. They were certainly national pride, but were they part of Eretz Yisrael as in the part that has to keep Shemitah? Iffy. Were they part of Eretz Yisrael for Truma and Meiser? D'Rabbanan, yes, but not D'Oraisa. So when is Israel not Israel? When it's Israel occupied territories, as the other nations of the world like to call the Golan Heights now. Imagine how horrified they would be if we were taking everything into Syria way above the Golan Heights. Look where Damascus is, right over the word Sova. This is another 150 miles past Damascus. And all of that we say is ours during David HaMelech. Yep.
Tell me, in the territory that was lost under Saul, which like to the Phoenicians and to the Amorites and the Jews that were living there, what happened to them? Did they remain under the domain of the foreign nations, or did they flee into Israel proper?
To the best of my knowledge, most of them ran for it. And they said, you know what? It's dangerous. It's a time when we, let's do a new share and share the other thing instead. Boom. No, that didn't work. Okay, let's stop sharing and then start over. But for the most part, they seemed to run for it when they had the chance. So look, David smote Hadadezer ben Rehov, the king of Sova. That's that territory all the way up further north, on his way to the Nahar Paras. Some say that means Hadadezer wanted to dominate till the Nahar Paras. But others say it was David who went all the way up to the Nahar Paras. This is why the Gemara tells us that the Jewish people are like the moon. Unlike the sun, which shines as a whole unit every day, the moon waxes and wanes over time. Sometimes it's full. Most of the time it's not. The only time the Jewish moon was full outside in history, basically, according to the Gemara, is David and Shlomo, when Eretz Yisrael was that big. And it's sort of an astonishing thing. Here's another map, just to have a look. Here's our map of the Shaul time. Here's our map of the David time, several maps of the same thing. And here is what the Plishtim did right before David came in. One of the reasons Shaul's map was so small was the red arrows of the Philistines coming out and attacking in the prakim that Rabbi Toker did with us already. Places like Afek and Gezer and Bet Shemesh. That was the place where the Aron came on the cart and then they opened it up because they hadn't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. Don't open the Ark. It's not a good idea. As I remember a comedy, Not the Jewish Press, said back in the 80s, your face turns into Havdalah candle if you open up the Ark. And Lachish and Keilah, all of these places, look how far east the Philistines got, all the way to Ramah on the right-hand side of the map. The Philistines really not just nibbled, but gobbled away at Eretz Yisrael. And that's why only David was going to beat the Philistines. All of the rest of the kings and the Shoftim, Shimshon, the Philistines are always the top bad guys against us. Where does David go to war? Everywhere. Up north, out in Moab, out west with the Philistines, down south we'll see with the Amaleki and the Edomi, Ammon. David is fighting wars against everybody, and he's winning beautifully. Can you still hear me? Or are you losing me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Michael-
good. Yes,
Michael-
Barbara, shoot.
Say Phoenicia in Hebrew, I forgot.
Plishtim. Phoenicia is not. Phoenicia is Sar. That would
Oh,
be
Sar,
Hiram, the king who was a great ally of the Jewish people and who helped build the Beis Hamikdash.
Yeah,
So during David's time, Phoenicia, find it, Sidon. On this map, they call them Sidonians. They are our allies, and they like working with us with their craftsmen, helping Klal Yisrael build the Beis Hamikdash as beautifully
Right.
as we could.
Hiram, no?
Yep, that's Hiram the master builder. So back to the psukim. I'm so sorry for getting so
Can I
caught
just
up
ask
in
you
the
a
maps.
question? Can I ask a
The maps
question?
make me
Anthony?
thrilled. Question, yes, listening.
Was there a mitzvah of Kvishas Haaretz on all that area in the way north?
That area is not Kvishas Haaretz because that Aretz is not our Aretz. That Aretz
Maybe
is
that's
Aram.
Maybe that's where David HaMelech had blood on his hands.
And
But he
not
was
only that,
conquering-
but some say for David, that's the beginning of the end, even though he still has 20 years of rule left. But he got a little too territory obsessive. The empire of Eretz Yisrael. And remember also, this is when there's only one kingdom of Yisrael. David is Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayam, because there's no Yisrael and there's no Yehuda. We are all one happy kingdom, except during the 4 civil wars that were fought against David. We were always one happy kingdom, except when we weren't. But that Kivisha of land that was not Eretz Yisrael proper, David is going to be seen as being maybe going a little too far, a little too aggressive. Then again, we're going to see in a minute, how did he win? He won because God made sure that he won. So now just kind of continuing with the war up north.
Michael?
Yep, question, comment, yes?
Yeah, go, what's the Pasuk Gimel? Just go out, I'm just curious, any explanation why the end of the Pasuk, where she would go by Nahar and said, for us, is Kri below Siv?
Why was Paras Kri v'lo Ksiv? Because nobody ever did conquer the Euphrates River in the end. Rashi says, or one of the Mefarshim say, look here, Kingdom David and Solomon, it stops at the Euphrates River. We didn't cross it. So the Nahar Paras is written without the word Paras to show that that was the border of where the conquering succeeded. But again, just looking at this map and this entire huge area, including the Pelishtim that David and Shlomo dominate, and that is David for 40 years and Shlomo for 40 years. 80 years of dominating the Middle East is not easy to do. All right, Pasuk Daled, Vayilko David mimeno elef shrameos parashim. So while he is at it, David conquered from Hadadezer 1,700 riders, 1,700 horsemen, the Esrim Elef Ishragli, and another 20,000 footmen, by Aker David es kol harechev. And then David does something absolutely unexpected. He hocked, I had to look that up. O-U-G-H is pronounced so many different ways, you're never sure. He hocked all the chariot horses, which sounds like a very Yiddish thing for him to do. He hocked Arain from the Ferd. What does it mean by Ye'aker? He made them lame. Hocking a horse means cutting its hamstrings, which is, like what they did to Patrick, what's his name? Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl yesterday. Except miraculously, they gave him something in the middle of the halftime and he came back running around. Why did he hamstring the horses and left over of them for 100 chariots? So the Mefarshim look at it in 2 ways, but the most popular one is to say that one of the prohibitions, what are the 3 things a king is not allowed to have too much of in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim?
Horses.
A king may not have too much money. A king may not have more than 18 wives. And David was very scrupulous about that. I personally think one wife is plenty in terms of maintaining a relationship. How exactly 18, I don't know. We will see Shlomo, God willing, when the rabbi takes us to Malachim with his 1,000 wives. You really got to have questions about that. And a king is not allowed, like you all said, to have too many horses. David realized that taking all of these horses unnecessarily would have made him transgress the prohibition against too many horses. So to put temptation away from him, and he could have used them. Remember, he's making war in all directions. He needed military horses, but instead he hamstrung them and counted on God. And it's considered to be not wasteful, but a very positive act by David to show how he took his kingship very seriously and took the Torah's commands and demands of him very literally in this case. Then Batavo Aram Damasek. Then he came to Aram, which is an historic northern power that constantly torments us throughout Shoftim and especially throughout Sefer Malachim. Malchus Yisrael, the 10 tribes, has a lot of trouble with Aram. Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, really hates the Jews. That never happens up in Syria, but here it seems to have occurred. Probably a one-shot. And so Aram Damasek came La'azar Hadadezer Melech Tzova. They came to their ally, Hadadezer, to try to help him. Vayach David ba'Aram Ezer Mushnayim Elevish. So David said, fine, you want me to change the corpses to Arameans? That's fine by me. 22,000 Arameans dead, on top of 20,000 Sovatans dead. Vayosem David Nitzivim ba'Aram Damasek, and then he made them into a vassal state. He put governors there. Vatahi Aram LeDavid la'avodim nosei mincha. They became servants, paying tribute. Vayosha Hashem es David b'chol asher holach. And Hashem helped, or maybe saved, David in every place that he went. And that pasuk right there is kind of the key pasuk to the whole parak. Wherever David went, Hashem helped David to succeed. By contrast, this is Shmuel Aleph talking about Shaul making wars. In pasuk 47, this is parak Yud Aleph, I believe. The Shaul locha hamalucha al Yisrael. Shaul took his version of the kingdom and waged war b'chol oyevav saviv, all of his enemies, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sova, Plishtim, Chol Asher Yifneh, all of these places where he turned, just like David, he made war. But instead it says Yarshia. He would cause them to tremble. He would do wicked things to them. David, it says, Vayosha Hashem es David. Shaul, it says, Yarshia. What's the difference between Yarshia and Vayosha? So Rabbi Amnon Bazak says it's a very significant difference indeed. Shaul put the enemies to the worse, knocked them down. But there was no salvation involved. Vayosha, says Rabbi Bazak, like we say every morning in davening, like we said in Parshas B'Shalach, where we were talking about before the Shiras Hayam, Yisrael and Bes Moshe Avdo, that God saved us. David's mission was to ensure that the Jewish people were saved. And so David's salvation was Jewish salvation. Shaul could ensure that he did nasty things to the enemy, but it was always temporary. And it never, sorry, I'm just trying to close this one. There we go. And it never had a permanent, ongoing impact on the Jewish people. Even though we didn't keep a hold of David's empire, but it represented the salvation of the Jews from their enemies around them. I've been talking to Itai Lahav about some plans for the 75th anniversary of Eretz Yisrael on Yom HaAtzmaut this year. Big anniversary. And he keeps stressing very strongly that this is a Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. We forget because we're so accustomed to being able to get on a plane and go to Israel anytime we want to and go see the Kotel. And one of the speakers we had a month or two ago was talking to us about how we should all go to the Har HaBayit and walk around on the permissible parts. And I told a friend of mine about it, and he said, no, thanks. If I go to the wrong part of the Har HaBayit, then I got struck by a lightning bolt and maybe Kare. So I'm not sure I'm going to take chances with that. But imagine 55 years ago, right before I was born, when the Kotel was still inaccessible to Jewish people in 1967. Think about the contrast to all of the millennia where the Jews davened to have access to Eretz Yisrael. The fact that David could accomplish these great things is certainly a salvation, even if it didn't stick. But our claim to Eretz Yisrael goes back to these times, and obviously before, to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the ancient days when Eretz Yisrael was our land. Yom HaAtzmaut is a very special day on a 75th anniversary. But if you look at it as a 3,375th anniversary, it's even better that way. Any questions before we go on and start rattling off military victories? So here we go. Hadadezer's servants had quivers of gold for their arrows. And David brought those to Jerusalem. And from the cities of Tzova, David, he took huge quantities of copper. He took huge quantities of gold. What did Rabbi Tokayer say last week? He did not do with it. What did David not build? What did David not create? Despite having all this precious metal that would have been so incredible there.
The Beis HaMikdash.
The Beis HaMikdash. Bloody hands. David was not the man to build the Beis HaMikdash. So the gold and copper, according to some authorities, never got used. It got stashed away in treasure houses, but it didn't go to glorify God at the Beis HaMikdash. But if you look at Divrei Hayamim, it says that this same copper, Divrei Hayamim, of course, is the alternative supplemental version of the history of all of the Malchus based David over the centuries. It says that the copper that were in huge quantities, Harbe Ma'od, became built into the Yam Shel Shlomo. The Yam Shel Shlomo was a massive mikveh for the Kohanim out in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. The Yam Shel Shlomo is tremendous, and I've seen people try to capture it in illustration. It was just enormous. It held something like, I can't remember. If the average mikveh is supposed to be 40 sa'ah, I think it was a 960 sa'ah. It was enormous. It was like 90 feet. It was like an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And the copper basin that was called the Sea of Solomon rested on the backs of 12 solid copper cows, oxen, facing out in all four directions, north, east, west, and south. Where did the copper come from to make the Yam Shel Shlomo? Divrei Hayamim says it came from here, from David. So it's interesting that on the one hand, we say that David did not build the Beis HaMikdash. On the other hand, skipping very briefly down to Pasuk Yud Aleph near the bottom, Gam Osan Hikdish HaMelech David LaHashem Im HaKesef VeHazav Asher Hikdish Mikol HaGoyim Asher Kibesh. It turns out David dedicated to God the silver, the gold, the copper. There's a Gemara that says many of the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash were forged by David. Although he didn't build the building, he got all the kelim ready in advance. And Shlomo may have used some of them. So the duality the rabbi was mentioning last week about his hands being too bloody and not being appropriate for the Beit HaMikdash, but at the same time, Divrei Hayamim and the commentators saying some of the spoils of war was used for the Beit HaMikdash, is an interesting dichotomy that we don't quite solve. And we're not quite sure which of them is more accurate. One other thing, and this is a criticism of David, Later on in David's reign, all of this gold and silver and copper was stashed away. And then David conducted a census. Maybe you know this story. We mention it in the Haggadah every Pesach. David wrongly counted the Jewish people, ushering in years of famine during a righteous king, during David HaMelech. And David sees a vision of an angel with a sword outstretched against Jerusalem and realized he is at fault. But the one thing David did not do was take all the gold and silver that was in the treasure houses and use it to buy food for the starving people of Jerusalem. And there's a medrash that says that God grew angry with David and said to him, "What do I want with gold and silver and precious metals if you are not using it to save the lives of the poor victims of a famine that is at its basis your fault in the first place?" I believe David did tshuva for 6 months and may have walked in sackcloth and barefoot for much of that time, because he did sincere tshuva over forgetting that money is only worth something if you use it properly. So donate to Kingsway. Play the boxes for the Super Bowl. Oh, well, I guess that's for next year. So there's a pitch for tzedakah that even David HaMelech was found a little bit liable on his level, or maybe a lot liable, for not acting properly. All right, any questions, anything else? We'll just catch up on Tess and Yud now in the middle. So Vayishma Toi Melech Hamas. So another kingdom. It's funny how these words recur. Hamas is still a word for us in the land of Israel these days, many thousands of years later. So Toi, the king of Hamas, which was a nation way up north next to Tzova, he heard David is Kolchel Hadadezer, that Tzova had been vanquished, and the entire army of Hadadezer had either been killed or certainly defeated. Vayishlach Toi es Yoram beno el HaMelech David l'sh'al lo l'shalom. This is a common thing in the Middle East during this era. You send hostages. You send your child as a mark of vulnerability to say, I want peace, and here's my son and heir's head that you could chop off if you wanted to. He sent his son to make peace with the Jews. Ulevarcho, and to bless him. Al asher nilcham b'hadadezer vayaked. Why is the king of Hamas, next to Tzova, thrilled that David killed Hadadezer or defeated Hadadezer, his next door neighbor? Why? Ishmael Chamos Toi haya Hadadezer. Because Toi hated Hadadezer and was fighting with him all the time. And the enemy of my enemy is my ally. So he sent tribute to David as well. So David is making money hand over fist from the enemies that are vanquished. David is making more money hand over fist from the people who are thrilled that he vanquished the other enemies. Everybody wants to be our friend. Can you imagine? They Aram, skipping Yudalef, we did it before. Umi Moav, Umi Bnei Ammon, Umi Plishtim, Umi Amalek. Amalek. Umi Shalal Hadadezer ben Rechov Melech Tzova. All this money, all of the gold and the spoils. Do you see any problem with Pasuk Yud Beis?
Yeah, Amalek.
What about Amalek?
I never, they wanted to make peace with Bnei Israel at that time?
It doesn't say they made peace. It says we got spoils from them. The one who made peace was Toi of Hamas.
Oh.
Aram, Moav, Ammon, Plishtim, and Hadadezer did not make peace. But what's the problem with Amalek being there?
Are we allowed to take shalol from them?
Are we allowed to take money from Amalek?
No.
I don't think so.
The commentators have a big problem with this, because normally you're supposed to machotim. Purim is coming. Machotim zecher Amalek. You're supposed to destroy all memory of Amalek. What are we doing? Taking spoils and money from Amalek and keeping the money. And there's not really a satisfactory answer as to how David can justify this. that we can keep the gold and silver that we got from Amalek, our
I
arch
thought,
enemy. So in fact, the Me'am Loe says, this is surprising. It implies the spoils of war taken from Amalek were permitted for use, when generally this was not so. So we don't have an answer when he says stuff like that. He's like, I don't know. I can't see how we were allowed to use that. I can't see how we were allowed to keep it. And the rest of the Mefarshim seem to be pretty much on the same page. Let me just look for a quick pasuk Yud Beis in the Mefarshim here. See if anybody gives even half an answer.
I
No, I don't
wanted to ask a question.
Shoot, please do.
Yes, is it true that the reason that the Klal Yisrael was punished for not, it wasn't for the census, but it was because they didn't ask for the Beis Hamikdash to be built because they didn't.
Oh, that's true.
back up.
That's another explanation given, is the delay of the Beis Hamikdash. But that one is a harder one to work with if it's not David's fault that he didn't build the Beis Hamikdash, because it wasn't for him to do. But he certainly didn't try to get the site of the Beis Hamikdash as quickly as he could. He pushed it off. Some say that he let Yerushalayim be unconquered while he was making all these wars left and right with all of these outside territories. So, what's more important? Making sure that your interior is taken care of and secure and your religious life is solid, or making an empire, which might mean you're neglecting the home front and causing problems back there. Very fair point. Very
But
true.
Didn't
Well,
David
David
always
always
do the will of
Yerushalayim.
Hashem?
David almost always did the will of Hashem, except when he didn't. It is the wonderful thing about David HaMelech, is that unlike virtually any other religion or history that one could read of a nation, we don't whitewash David HaMelech. Did we do the Bathsheba incident yet? I don't think so. I think that's Perek Yud Beis, right? The story of Bathsheba is the best. I don't know if the rabbi wants to take off for Perek Yud Beis, but I'd be more than happy to fill in, because David takes Bathsheba in a questionable manner, and the Navi rebukes him and tells him the parable of a poor man with only one sheep, one lamb, and the rich man beats him up and kills him and takes his sheep. And the Navi, I think it's Gad HaNavi, says, you're the rich man, killed the poor man. So David is warts and all, and that's what makes him spectacular, is that he does, they say, it says in Tehillim, Tzaddik falls 7 times, but always gets back up again. And that's the greatness of David HaMelech, is that every time something goes wrong, he doesn't push it under the rug. He just overcomes it. And so,
Could you help me understand something? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to David HaMelech, when you fail, like before, when he asked to be the 4th wheel in the Kisei Kavod, and Hashem said, you haven't been tested yet. And he said, I want to test. And Hashem said, when you fail, so if Hashem tells you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you you're going to fail, you might as well flagrantly fail.
but well, yeah, let's wait for that for Perek Yud Beis. It's wonderful. I'm sure the rabbi's going to take at least a month and a half, because it is the source of Mashiach. It is the source of who we are as a people. The birth of Solomon, the conception of Solomon. I can't wait for it. I'm telling you personally, it's one of my favorite areas of Tanakh, because such a human being and such a weak and yet strong human being. Oh, I can't even go there. So let's try to finish this one up so the rabbi can come in fresh, because Perek Tes is also a lot of fun, which should be next week's shiur. Vayas David Shem, and David made a name for himself, to say the least. Biggest Jewish empire we've ever had. Beshuvo mehakoso es Aram became Melech. When he returned from defeating Aram in the Valley of Salt, Shmona Asar Elef, 18,000 men. There's some dispute as to where this Valley of Salt is, because Aram is in the north, but a Valley of Salt would sound like it's connected to the Dead Sea, which is in the south. So some people say that the Valley of Salt has to do, and it's out of order, with Edom, the southern kingdom that we are fighting, especially because the very next pasuk Yudalit says, "Vayosem be'Edom netzivim b'chol Edom sam netzivim," twice, and he placed governors in Edom, all of Edom. Vayichol Edom avodim leDavid, and all of Edom were servants to David. Vayosha Hashem es David b'chol asher halach, same language, north and south. Edom is a fascinating subject here because Edom, of course, is Esav. And the Edomites immediately were screaming at us, "You have no right to come attack us," because it says in Sefer Bamidbar, during the conquering times, as we're wandering the Midbar with Moshe Rabbeinu, God warns us specifically, do not attack Edom. That is Esav's Yerusha. Lo yiskar bo milchama. We're not supposed to start war with Edom. We were also warned not to start war with Aram. That goes back even further, earlier in this parak. That goes back to Lavan. I don't know if you remember the story in Parshas Vayetze by Yishlach, where Lavan is chasing after Yaakov when Yaakov absconds with his wives and his children. And Lavan says to him, "Habanos bonosai v'habonim bonai." Your daughters are my daughters, your sons are my sons. That's because Lavan was a grandpa. And I can tell you, having a small grandson, that's my grandson. Don't you take away my grandson. I sort of understand Lavan, which I'm embarrassed to say. But they made a deal, Yaakov and Lavan. They put up a gal, stone, that would be a marker. And Hagal Hazeh Eid, a matzeva between Aram and Yisrael, so that we would not attack Aram.
And what
So-
about Moab?
Well, and Moab we weren't supposed to attack either, and we attacked them last week. So why are we attacking all those nations that God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't attack them? Now, granted, it's 500 years later, but we're attacking Aram. The Matzeva said not to. We're attacking Edom. God said not to earlier on. We're attacking Moab. So the Jewish people, through David, replied to all three. To Moab, they said, fine, we're not supposed to attack you, but what did you do? You, in the form of Balak, went and hired Bilam to curse us and attack us first. So if you broke the treaty, you can't blame us for breaking the treaty. The same way when we fight the Pelishtim, where we had a deal with Avimelech not to fight. You broke the treaty first. We're going to have self-defense. Aram, a little iffier, but Aram did attack us, and Bilam was from Aram. So Bilam was breaking the non-aggression treaty by trying to curse us in the Midbar. And Edom attacked us on numerous times. And Edom really was making trouble and going after us. As David was attacking the north, Edom was rebelling in the south. And so David justified all of these return attacks. And the fact that Hashem saved David in everything he did and everywhere he went shows that God accepted his justifications for breaking ancient non-aggression pacts that all of the people around us were very willing to break. If you think about Israel and the Middle East and how many different countries have broken their vows not to go after us, and then they go after us with both barrels, you understand that sometimes the only defense is a good offense. So Vayimloch David just trying to wrap up the parak because Pasuk Yud Ches is the end here. Vayimloch David al Kol Yisrael, and David ruled over all of Israel. And as we said before, all of Israel and more, this massive area, Hamas, Sova, Aramean kingdoms, Phoenicia became an ally, capturing Yerushalayim, defeating Ammon and Moab as a vassal state. Edom ruled by a military governor until a rebellion that came later. David made Eretz Yisrael absolutely epic. All the way to the Euphrates River to Bavel. Astonishing. By David osa mishpat and tzedakah l'chol amo. And David did two faintly contradictory things. He administered justice, but also charity and mercy for all his people. How did he do so? So Rashi and the Mefarshim say, because he appointed good people and created a government bureaucracy to manage. Yosef HaTzadik showed us that earlier, that a really solid bureaucracy can actually do good things for the people. He had Yoav ben Tzeruya on the army, Al Hatzava. Yoav ben Tzeruya is a very scary dude. We saw him with Avner when the rabbi told us about Yoav being chased by Avner and sticking him in the fifth rib, and his brother Amasa. Yoav is going to kill many more people. In early Malachim, we'll hear what David says about his fear of Yoav ben Tzeruya, who is his nephew. Tzeruya was David's sister. Yehoshaphat ben Achilud Mazkir. Yehoshaphat, the son of Achilud, was the recorder. As we know from King Achashverosh, Purim reference, you need to have a book of records to read from. If you have insomnia, I like Yehoshaphat because maybe this is the original Jumpin' Jehoshaphat. I'm not sure. I don't know if he jumped, but I always liked Jumpin' Jehoshaphat when it showed up in old Western movies. Gabby Hayes used to say things like that. Tzadok ben Achitov and Achimelech ben Evyasar were the Kohanim. One of them, Tzadok, is mentioned as a Kohen Gadol earlier. Achimelech ben Evyasar, his father Evyasar, was part of all the Kohanim massacred in Nov by Shaul HaMelech. Both of these men would be Kohanim Gedolim over time. Usiraya Sofer, he's also called Shovna in other texts. Finally, Benayahu ben Yehoyada was one of the great administrators of David. Benayahu ben Yehoyada is going to be very well known during the times of David's son Solomon. Benayahu becomes his right-hand man. Benayahu is the one who kills Yoav finally. Spoiler alert. If you ever saw the old cartoon in the Jewish press of somebody maybe mute just for another few minutes, I promise. Benayahu is in the Adventures of the Wise King Solomon by Spielman and Fine in the old Jewish press. He had a very sharp nose like everybody else in that comic strip. Benayahu ben Yehoyada was a Kohen, but a very skilled warrior. So he killed a lot of enemies, which led to questions, because a Kohen can't become Tamei Mace. A Kohen can't murder somebody. So what is the answer to how he did it? So some say he was very skilled at delivering the death blow and then pulling the sword back right away. So he was never touching the guy while he died. He stayed tahor that way. Others say that it was just he was empowered to be a warrior for the sake of the kingdom. And Benayahu ben Yehoyada had the kresi and the plesi, which means a variety of things. Some say kresi are the ones who bent the bows, and the plesi were the slingers of stones. Some say the kresi were those who cut wood, and the plesi were stonemasons. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says the kresi and the plesi were the Sanhedrin and the elders who gave and took in Torah machlokes. And that's what David really wanted to do, was to steig all day instead of having to administer. But what the people wanted from him was justice and mercy, mishpat and tzedakah. And so David was expected to hold court over the people. Finally, uvnei David kohanim hayu. Now that can't be literal, because David's sons weren't Kohanim, they were David's sons. They were from Shevet Yehuda. So they became, as if they were Kohanim, high status people in the government. We know that Yosef in Sefer Bereshis and Vayechi, the government bureaucrats were called Kohanim. Acha Kohanim, it says in Vayechi, maintained their position. Say again?
Ministers. I thought it would say priests, but in here it says senior ministers.
Right, or chief officers like it says on screen. Because in Yosef in Egypt, the Kohanim were not necessarily religious figures. They were sometimes top officers. So that's, wow, 8:59. Woo, just got in there, including my 5 minutes of technical difficulties. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I'm sorry if I covered a lot of ground, but the maps blow my mind when I see all of it. I had to share them.
Is it true that David never slept on his bed? His bed? Because
There's, I mean,
because
David
are
used
you-
to
you
wake
didn't
up
think-
at midnight
because-
to also write Tehillim on top of everything else. So David had insomnia problems himself. If you
No, I'm
hang
talking
on
about
a
because
few
of the
weeks
fact
for
that-
Purim, both the king and Mordechai have trouble sleeping. That's when you hear very interesting things from Big Son and Seraph. But David did sleep. Whether he slept on his bed or on the ground, there were periods of his life when he was in mourning and doing tshuva, and then he did not sleep on a bed. I think the rabbi covered some of that in Shmuel Aleph, but I don't know that it says, thank you, Ron. I don't know that it says that David never slept on a bed. So I don't know the answer to that. My
Michael, could I,
grandson just learned this week to say, I don't know, which is very hilarious when it's from a 1.5-year-old. Yes, questions, other people. I heard somebody speaking first.
fine, I just want to ask,
Is it true it might have been a treaty? That's why the wars weren't waged. The wars were happened because the treaty ended before when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said the treaty ended.
Could be. I mean, for example, the Plishti Treaty the Rabbi talked about in Yehoshua, when Yehoshua didn't make war on the Plishtim, and then in Shoftim, when Shimshon became the first to make war on the Plishtim. So it's funny that the neighbors of Israel take these treaties very seriously when it comes to Jewish aggression. They always have problems with us fighting back against them. And they yell about treaties, but when they fight against us, it's okay because, we're fascists and stuff. Sorry if I sound sarcastic, if I'm offending anybody Palestinian in the audience, I apologize in advance. My politics do not need to be your politics. Other people, I'm sorry, Barbara, you had a hand up.
yeah, I just wanted to say, you said Bilam was from Aram. Does that
That's
mean?
according to some, that's where he was living. Aram Naharayim. He was living. I think it says that. I don't have my chumash in front of me, but I'll check that out. I saw that in the Me'am Loes, but I'm not sure from where.
But Midian isn't in Aram, in other words, or is?
Oh no,
Midian-
Midian is further to the southeast. I think Bilam was living out of a suitcase because wherever the money was, that's where Bilam went. And he brought his trusty donkey with him. Hamed bin Yavid, you could read the pshatim about him and the donkey. They had a very close relationship.
Aram Naharaim was where Avram was from originally.
Aram Naharayim El Ir Nachar, and that's where Abraham had all kinds of problems with his northern neighbors. We have a lot of Aram coming. When we get to Malachim and King Achav, you're going to see Aram. And then Ashur is going to swallow them up, and then Bavel will swallow them both up. The northern kingdoms have a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anything else? Please, by all means, shout out.
Tell me, on the map of the 12 tribes in the land, it appears that Manasseh had the most territory.
Because they were
larger
on
than
both
Judah.
sides. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Let me put that back up. There it is, right?
Yeah,
Because they were in the Transjordan as well.
Yes, they seem to have more territory than Judah. Is there any reason for that?
They have more
Well, Menashe was divided in half. Some say because they wanted to be. Others say at Moshe's request. But they were a very populous tribe. What is interesting is that a big chunk of that is now the West Bank. So we have
Right.
trouble maintaining control over it. There's Shechem right there in Menashe. Poor Shechem. Shechem has never gotten along very well.
Yeah, well, that's where Ephraim's father is buried. Yeah.
Wide variety of terrible tragedies at Shechem all the time. And Ephraim, notice how much smaller Ephraim is than Menashe, but Ephraim was the dominant brother despite being the younger one. And also this map, I'm not 100% sure that this map is 100% accurate. It is an internet map. And so, buyer beware, caveat emptor.
Menashe had a lot of cattle also, a lot of tzon uvakar. So,
As
and they
did
needed
Ruben
it.
and Gad. And in Devorah, in the Haftorah that we did for Bishalach 2 weeks ago, Devorah says, you're all out in the middle of all your cows listening to the mooing. Why don't you come help when we need help? And so unfortunately, Naphtali and Barak were on their own. If there's nothing else, just looking. Thank you all for staying late
Thank
all the way
you.
to 9:04.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me come. Rabbi Toker sent me a text message 3 minutes before Shabbos on Friday. And I
Oh,
was
wow.
super excited to say yes, but I got to say, I didn't get the text message till after Shabbos. So there you go. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Thank
Let me
you
stop.